We're just
We've
getting
pinned our speakers for you today.
Oh,
The
we
waiting
can't speak.
room is empty, so whenever you would like to get started, I've
Okay.
pinned you three so that everyone should see you as the presenters, talkers, etc. So whenever you are ready to get going, feel free to start.
All
Or
righty.
introduce yourselves if you want first before you
Yeah,
start, because people have seen me but not y'all.
why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves? I am just putting my slides in order because I thought that was a thing. Cal,
What?
introduce yourself.
Myself? Okay. Hey, I'm Kel Backus. I had a yarn business, 100 Ravens, with Becca for many, many years now. Crafter of long time. I'm also a historian, and I'm interested in craft over time in history, and the history of different crafts. So I'm super excited to be having this conversation.
Hi, I'm Kat from Why Not Fibers. I'm a dyer of yarn and a facilitator of farm needle yarns. So I love different variations of crafticism, both in the past and in the present and moving forward. And I see part of my role in that is just kind of helping make accessible things, some fiber things that you wouldn't necessarily see or haven't for a long time. And I'm babbling already. Okay.
That's what you're here for.
Love you, Kat.
So I'm Becca. I now run 100 Ravens. And the whole craftivism movement kind of sparked my curiosity a couple of years back, and I've been following it since then. And there just seemed to be kind of an explosion. There's a new BBC special. We'll talk about that. And so I thought, what a fun thing to sort of explore with people, talk about. There's a lot of history there. Like Kel, I'm kind of a student of history. And so I thought it would be fun to kind of have a conversation around. So given that, let's go ahead and get started, I guess. So I don't have a slide for this because, and I just wanted to jump right off on it. But one of the things that comes up a lot is, I mean, women, men, people have been crafting since we needed clothes, since we made art, forever, since there have been people. And since we started, people have done it with intention. And so intention absolutely implies that there is some meaning to what you're doing, whether it's trying to make your dress just a little nicer than somebody else's, or I don't know, saying that how somebody else's pottery looked was not proper. um, anyway, so we can go all the way back. But there is kind of a point at which we have started to identify things. And one of the things that people will throw out there a lot for kind of early American, well, going back further, people will talk about the Underground Railroad quilts. And I had heard about them. I thought it was a really cool thing that there were these quilts, and they talked about how to make it from one house to the next, or what you needed to do in order to keep safe going to this house. Things like dress more richly than you might normally, or pretend to be a peddler or something like that. And that these themes came from quilting back in Africa, and that these story quilts were something that had come forward with, or come over with, the African people who became slaves. Turns out it's kind of maybe possible, but probably not. That a lot of the historical stuff that people were referencing back in Africa is stuff that is came into African quilting as a result of people hearing about story quilts from these books that people wrote in America about the Underground Railroad. There's some stuff that is real, some that isn't, but it's interesting that it's so much a part of how we think about these things that we have actually written history that isn't, or that is quite possibly not real history.
Almost the propaganda of the story making it become real in our heads.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. And there's, why can I not think today? Let's see, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, that's who I was trying to think of, were both huge knitters, well beyond just making clothes and stuff for themselves. So there is something there that they were doing crafts as protest. Some people say, Betsy Ross with the flag was, crafting protest. So yeah, there's a lot of that out there that we can identify and speak to. So one of the ones that I wanted to talk about first, I'm sorry, I keep talking. Let me stop. Hi, guys. Kel, thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. Keep going.
Okay. This is not meant to be a lecture. I just happen to be the one with the slides.
Don't worry, we'll lecture later.
Okay. Anyway, so Underground Railroad quilts, maybe not. Creating flags, probably. Could be considered early craftivism. Definitely early craftivism is something. Let's see. There we go. The ladies from the suffrage movement did and very thoughtfully, very purposefully created so much fabric art and embroidered art that was used in their protests. The sashes, we always see the sashes, but also these great banners. And there are some of them, I couldn't put them all up on the slides, or I could have just done a whole talk on just the banners. But there, it was things like, one of my favorites is a one where it's got all these women, and she can be a scientist, she can be a mother, she can be a teacher, or all these things, and what she can't do, vote. What he can be, a criminal, a philanderer, traitor, was a sedition, something. Anyway, on, and what he can do is vote. And it was just, it was just these little things, and it's that early sense of, we don't own the printing presses. We don't, although they did eventually find a printer who did a lot of leafleting for them. This is how we can get our voice out there. So
Almost that piece where you may not be able to give us a place to speak or not let us vote, but we can sure say what we want to say, and you can't stop us from embroidering things and sewing things and really expressing ourselves. So that piece of self-expression and goal really is a motivator, so that it's the kind of thing that almost ends up starting that motion, and just it keeps feeding itself. And that was where it ramped up, and that was the beauty of it, because like sharing knowledge of how to do these crafts, it also gave an opportunity to talk about the suffrage movement and to talk about what they were trying to accomplish. And so it was, it is in the pieces themselves, but just in those sewing circles and those knitting circles and things was getting information out. Because how do you, when you don't have Facebook, you talk to each other.
Right, exactly.
So,
Well, and this one, sorry, Cal, really quickly. I like this one. This is, of all the ones I could have picked, there were more clever ones and more famous ones, but I really liked this because it's local, right? So you would have a banner that was about your, that was speaking to your local fight. And I know some clever woman put this little sheep down here, but we all know it's also a womb.
well, clearly.
Cal?
100%. I'm not arguing. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I've been looking at this banner and just like, it's great. It's great. I mean, so much about it is, well, and Huddersfield and District, right? And one of the things we're talking about here is that these are that where crafting becomes consciously deeply political, with the intent of, as Becca said, we were talking about this panel, that what matters is that it is politicized, and its intent specifically is to influence politics, and to effect political change, and deep change. And I think it's interesting because it's saying, like, we are from this district, we're from this area, that is a voting district, and we represent this area. And I think that's an interesting way to put it, and obviously intentional.
Yep.
With the
I'm gonna
the,
move on to the next slide if that's okay.
no, sorry.
You're good.
Yeah.
So
Becca, real quick, your mom did mention in chat Craftivism in literature and Madame Defarge from, like, in literature,
yeah,
right? Like that,
yeah,
like Craftivism in literature as well. It's popped up in literature, women in literature
absolutely,
doing
All
it.
over the place.
absolutely.
Just wanted to add that in.
All over the place.
But now I've lost my mouse. I'm sorry, guys.
That's okay. And Linda, yes, that's absolutely with, I feel like the layers of symbolism in a lot of the crafts of many of the movements, but in that specifically that needlecraft of the suffrage movement, it really, because it was, as well as it was applique, you were literally layering things on top of each other with that type of crafting.
Right.
But you're also layering the meanings on top of each other. So you can put so much symbolism in such a small thing because that visual element is so strong, and it just has such power to transmit ideas. Whereas even if someone couldn't read, or even if someone wasn't close enough to read something, if they could, they can see a symbol and then their brain can take that in and pick it apart, and you can kind of get those layers in. So anyway.
There we go. So Gandhi, when he was first, well, not first, because he'd already been jailed, and while in jail, he created a portable spinning wheel to help people become more self-sufficient, less reliant on British-made textiles as they were trying to become independent from colonialism. And so while this did not change the textile economy entirely in India, it did bring a lot of interest, a lot of not what's the word I'm looking for, guys? It did make people aware of the fight that was going on there, and help to by doing that, help to move things along for that protest.
It was able to be used as a catalyst almost.
Yeah. And I just thought it was really interesting that, a lot of what craftivists, we'll see it more, I think, in later slides, but so, you know, we think of some craftivist movements right now as being very sort of in your face and a little loud, which personally I'm all for. But a lot of the craftivist movement is also talking about quiet activism, doing things alone in your room for introverts, for people who don't want to go and march and protest and stuff, where they can create things that then go out into the world and make change. This is kind of that. This is a very much more quiet form of protest.
Definitely a very intentional one, though.
Yes.
It ends up being a foundational piece rather than a flamboyant piece. And both are necessary, but having that holding up the next step is so neat to see the bits pieces.
Yeah, and I like that it's the design of a crafting implement
Mm-hmm.
as much as it is of the craft itself.
The
So,
tools of the movement, if you will.
yeah, yeah. I'm going to skip right on to the next slide. This is the Greenham Commons Women's Peace Camp. It was started in
It actually
1980.
hasn't changed the slide.
Oh, I'm so sorry. There it is.
Oh, there we go.
Apologize. Um, I I pushed the wrong button. So this started in '81 after, and Kel's gonna love this, a Welsh group, um,
Of course.
Women for Life on Earth. It was an anti-nuke movement, and it just started. They just showed up at the Greenham Commons and decided to never leave. Um, and and uh, part of what they started doing were these banners, and they used the materials they had there to begin with. They were stitching on blankets and things that they brought with them, and then slowly got more materials and stuff. And you can see some of these are a little more involved, but yeah, these were all created right there at the camp, and that was just, and it seems, I know, we always talk about, well, it's not just women who um, stitch or craft, and it's not just older women, but you'll see over and over again these early ones especially tended to be moms. It was that mom age range, that this was their means of protest, and I think that comes from uh, a little bit of that generation, maybe not being as encouraged to be vocal. Not like my kid. My daughter, my daughter's never going to need to stitch her words. She's going to say them out loud.
So Carol in the comments brought up the Daughters of Liberty.
Okay.
And, just before the Revolutionary War,
Oh yeah.
women who would get together and have spinning bees and create cloth for local people to wear that was not British textiles. And so it was literally in protest to the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts. And it was one of those, I started reading about it, and it's just so interesting because because women were in charge of, if they were responsible for those goods in their household, it gave them a foothold to use that because they were the ones doing the spinning and doing the weaving and doing the sewing for the most part. And so it's just so interesting to see how, because that was a very blatant thing to do,
Yes.
but it was simple.
Yeah, very much so.
So, did you lose your mouse again?
Nope, I'm good.
You look like you were looking for something. So I thought that was a very pertinent piece to craftivism because it was because it was that intentional clothing of oneself, but using intentional clothing as oneself as a protest to how things were being done.
Right.
So, I mean, just wearing a piece of cloth, whether it had anything on it or not, that you made was a statement of defiance.
Right. I'm going to do one more slide that's about moms, I guess. Well, no, definitely about moms. These are the Madres de las Plaza de Mayo from Argentina. this is actually, I got these out of order. This is because I was trying to do chronological. This is 1977. And this is in response to the national reorganization process that we all know from the disappearances in Argentina. And these mothers would gather in the plaza and demand to know where their kids were. And, you know, by kids, we're talking adult children, but and so there's still a painting of this of a headkerchief like this in the plaza, and they would wear them, and they had stitched the names of their kids um, onto these kerchiefs, and then they would wear them, and you know, it was just, and they would wear them for the protest, but they would also wear them just around. So, yeah,
Just statement.
yeah.
Heart-wrenching one.
Yeah, some of these are really heart-wrenching. So this is the next one. This one's the one that kind of gets to me just from my own life. But the
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
the AIDS quilt was Craftivism, and it's really interesting to me. The history of it is that these I can't remember now the name of the guy who came up with the idea, and I'm sorry for that. But he came up with this idea. He and his friends did them, and it was at a time when people still weren't talking about it. I mean, we see it now, and we see how many of them there are, and it's this big thing. But when it first started, it was when nobody was talking about AIDS, and it was when, you know, it was still very shameful, and so they came up with this, and moms of young men who had died, who had no way to grieve publicly because it was so shameful to admit that their sons had been gay, suddenly glommed onto this idea. So we think of this as the AIDS quilt as having been a gay movement or a LGBT movement, but it was really the moms, and they, you know, these Midwestern moms who didn't, and this is not uh, a kind of lore or anything. This is actually true, that they were quilters and they were stitchers, and they finally had a way, using something they knew, to talk about this thing that had been so devastating to them. And the guys who had started this weren't really thinking, you know, they had done it. They had a few folks, they were doing it. They were trying to figure out a way to show the quilts that they had somewhere. And all of a sudden they started getting them in droves, so that they had so many, they didn't know what to do. And that's where the idea to lay them out on the lawn, the in the Capitol, came from, because there were so many of them that they had no expectation that it was going to be like this. And of course, they are very personal, and very awesome. But I just wanted to show, you know, kind of what they were like. And it was everybody. It was all different kinds of people. And yeah, so, but made the thing in Washington was one of the first times that, you know, it became part of the national conversation, where it wasn't about the disease, but about the people.
Not the people.
And that was very much humanized.
Well, yeah, and let's talk about that for a minute, right? Because part of the politicization of AIDS was all about calling it the quote unquote gay disease, and separating human beings, people, from humanity by
Othering.
we often do, so this is not a new human thing, right? This is a lepers during the Middle Ages and early modern era, were separated out from society physically, but also in terms of like how they were represented and perceived, right? Because they were ill, they were somehow less than human. And there were laws, similar laws to, anti-gay laws, and a lot of discrimination against lepers. And then we see it again that, in AIDS, this was an attempt to sort of dehumanize human beings and to downplay, of course, the actual medical severity of the virus and its implications for everyone. And what the quilts do is that they, as Becca said, they reconnect gay people with humanity, that their families lovingly reclaim them in these quilts, that their mothers say, these are not these, gay men over here in the bathhouses. This is my son, this is my brother, this is, these are people that are cared about and loved. And the whole idea of a quilt is a sort of, for us as Western folks, this is like a lifelong keepsake, right? This is a symbol of something that we treasure, that we put in a chest, that we pass down. And the idea that you memorialize someone in this comforting keepsake pulls the whole thing away from death and back into the idea of family and that powerful symbol of reclaiming these individuals as people who are loved and who are covered and protected and part of families, and that their memory is sort of kept and held in this loving symbol. So it's just incredibly powerful. And I think it did a lot. I think it, as Becca said, it was humanizing. It did a lot politically to change the view of gay men as sort of being that ostracized group over there and pulled back into humanity.
Exactly.
Becca, your mom again brought up a good point in chat. She said guys who were dying would design their own quilt for his survivors to make.
Yeah.
It also gives that piece of craftivism as a healing process for those that are honoring people that have passed and putting what they not necessarily say in words into the artifact that they're working on. And you can say things with textiles, with crafts that you can't necessarily always find the words for out loud. And, for fear of maybe not having the right words or not feeling like you don't have anybody to say it to, but having a platform to talk about this is an actual object of love. This is my love for this person. This is about this person and these people, and really giving that connect as a cathartic place to move forward. So it's, clearly not a happy thing. And
right.
But it's just being able to see and feel, because like that's like, that hits you right in the heart, just looking at people's grief and for people and looking at people's stories. And you can read 100 articles and they can hit you right, in the middle of the heart, but not, for me at least, not the same way something that someone has crafted with their hands, with their heart, with their love, each stitch will say, this is the person that I have loved.
Right.
Anyway, now that we're all needing
We're all agreeing.
Yeah.
so true. So, and just like you said, Cal, rehumanizing where we have othered our fellow human beings,
Right.
and really giving them their place back in society as our people, our brethren, our families, are all of the pieces. So anyway.
Yep. All right. So let's see. I'm going to share more slides because slides are fun.
I have some stuff to show too, Becca, when
Okay.
when it ever seems right. Is there a site? Yes, Linda, I believe that Jessica posted the link to the AIDS Memorial Quilt website. Maybe she'll post it one more time again when she has a chance, but it is in the chat. And there's a wonderful history of the whole thing there, plus tons of pictures. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Nope. I just hit the wrong again. Gosh darn it. Sorry, guys. There we go. All right. Um, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her collars. Well, she did not craft these. Many of these were crafted for her. Many of them in Africa by women in craft collectives that she supported, including her very favorite collar, which is this one here. She wore this the most often of any collar. Her very famous Descent collar, which in researching this, I have to say, I love this story so much. She got it in a gift bag of, like a swag bag at a awards show that she had been invited to. And I'm just like, you know, we hear about celebrities getting watches and tennis shoes and what have you. And I just love that the Descent collar, for some reason, I wanted it to be a much more, you know, uh, meaningful story than that. But for some reason, that just makes it so good. And she was famous for wearing this, of course, anytime she wanted to register dissent. I think it is so interesting about RBG that she was such a vocal person in her law career, and that by becoming one of the Supreme Court justices, she was silenced so much that there were so many things she couldn't say.
And yeah,
And that she used this coding to, to say the things she couldn't say. Some of the other ones, this is a collar that had been given to her by one of her law clerks when she, as a gift, when she officiated their wedding, and it became her official officiating collar. So she wore it to any time she officiated at a wedding after that. This one, I was telling the gals earlier, again, this is one of the few times she wore this color was in the official picture after Brett Kavanaugh was named to the court, or with him when he was officially on the court. And they call it the "I don't like him" collar.
it's definitely one that it sparks. I'm so sorry, my dog is offended by something outside. I hear that, but it definitely sparks that whole cavalry, bringing in the cavalry, and well, then I'm gonna put on my armor kind of thing, which I love.
Yeah, and I think it looks like it has sort of daggers.
So she did wear them and look them.
Yeah, well, so she was sort of shooting daggers at him. So yeah, and the pride, what they call the pride collar, this gal here, again, beaded in Africa, in oops, sorry, losing my mind here. I'm sorry, not in Africa, in Ecuador. I'm losing, but she wore it when she I'm sorry. She wore it when she was being interviewed right before or in the year before the marriage equality was coming to the Supreme Court, and the reporters asked her, "Oh, is that signifying something?" And of course, she couldn't say yes, but then she kind of said yes. So yeah, she's just kind of awesome that way. I love that they are. I love that so many of them were crafted by women in other countries, that it wasn't just about going out and buying a collar. It was, there was a lot of thoughtfulness to this. Anyway,
except for the descent color. Although I bet you there was a lot of thoughtfulness about that too.
Well, yeah, it kind of came
It's just-
around because, hang on, I think I've got the quote for this because I love this. It was in a, uh, okay, so here I just looked it up again. Sorry. It was in a swag bag at the Glamour Women of the Year Awards in 2012 that she got it. And then in 2014, she was interviewed by Katie Couric and said, "It looks fitting for descents." And she most notably wore it, well, she notably wore it for many descents that she had with the majority opinion on the court. But she also wore it the day after Trump was elected.
Lots and lots of
something. I can't tell you for sure, but I think yes.
You know, she was kind of the master at symbolism.
Yes.
And refused to be silenced even as her job required that certain things she be verbally silent about. And so, because that was not her nature.
Right. Like I said,
able to show her opinion, which I think that many of us can say what we're feeling without having to say anything, and really give a clear message of this is not okay or this is where I'm at without actually saying anything out loud. Again,
right.
It's that power of the visual piece.
Right.
Which I love.
So, kind of in an avalanche in the last handful of years, craftivism has really kind of come to the fore. A lot of it has to do with the group Craftivist Collective in England. They've had a couple of big, well publicized not movements, actions. And so I'm going to just show a couple of those because they're cool and they make pretty pictures.
Pretty pictures, so
we like pretty pictures. So the first is this was a thing they did with the World Wildlife Federation, and it was hashtag origami migration, and it was about saving wetlands that were actually a World Heritage Site that were very important to many migratory species, but one in particular was on the verge of extinction. And it was before the Spanish government to allow construction that would destroy the site. And so using the people, the many hands of the Craftivist Collective across the world and the World Wildlife Federation, they did the 1,000 cranes and made origami cranes and birds of all sorts, I believe. And this is in front of the Spanish Parliament. They also did an installation in front of the UNESCO offices. And this actually resulted in the Spanish Parliament voting not to allow the construction, which was kind of astounding.
So they created habitat to support that habitat.
Yeah. And so that was very cool. The other one that they are well known for is, sorry, I did the thing. Was a handkerchiefs to the shareholders at Marks and Spencer. And they delivered these at the Marks and Spencer's general meeting, the annual general meeting. They were each specially personalized to each of the shareholders, the 250 of them, giving messages to give a living wage to the workers at Marks and Spencer. And this one got a lot of media in England. It was kind of a big deal. They also handed out their own crafting kits to the board members to make their own.
Oh, nice.
Which I thought was, I don't know why, for some reason that, you guys tell me what you think, but I just thought that was a little extra, not dig, but just this like,
It was
yeah,
quality.
yeah,
It really,
like you too can be a craftivist. And well, they didn't actually, I thought that they, from what I had read, I thought that they had actually done it and voted, but there wasn't actually a vote. But they have since put a vote for the next annual general meeting to at least discuss this. You know, these things. We want more movement, but that's what we get, right? But it's, at least it's putting it out there, because I guess the big news from that is that many people didn't know Marks and Spencer did not sign on to a living wage for their, which is a big deal in England. So for their workers. So there we go.
I think it's really, really neat. And again, a lot of people coming together, putting a lot of work in, and giving them that that kit, like you said, it's them saying, "Here, you do your part," but it's also giving the opportunity to say, "You can be a part of this, not just do your part, but you are part of the whole." And I think that's a very important distinction there of not the us and them, but the you and I, and the we are. So, and Carol brought up the Poppies.
Oh, Kel, I bet, was going to talk about this, because when we were talking before, Kel brought this up. The Poppies, absolutely. Kel, jump in.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily think of the wearing of the poppies as political, but it is actually deeply political. Michael McRae wrote a poem which became sort of symbolic for, and I'm trying to get a copy of it up here, but he'd written a poem in Flanders Field in May of 1915. He was a field surgeon during World War I, and it was essentially an anti-war poem. It was not in any way sort of a rah-rah kind of poem. And I think that what's interesting about it is that, so to sort of, and I've got the story here, but there's this woman called the Poppy Lady, basically. Her name is Moira Michael. And November 9th in 1918, right before the armistice, she got a copy of the Ladies' Home Journal, and there was a color illustration, and then his poem, and she'd seen it before, but she took in the last verse, which is, "Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field." And she wrote her own poem, which was her vow to keep the faith with those who had died. And I mean, just remember that World War I was unprecedented because of the new technologies that were created for killing. We'd never seen anything like this before. And there was a danger, I think, as there often is, of this going unremarked. And I think that's what the poem was about. And I think that this was this pledge that she took, and it's called "We Shall Keep the Faith." And now, and the last line of that was, "And now the torch and poppy red we wear in honor of our dead. Fear not that ye have died for naught. We'll teach the lesson yet that ye wrought in Flanders Fields." And there's a reckoning there, and it's about that. And I think it's really easy to look at the wearing of the poppy as kind of it's okay that millions of people have died in battle because we remember them, but that's not the message. The message is no, it's really not okay. right? That there's a reckoning there. Don't do it again, right?
Learn from our history.
Right, and that and that's what she did. And so she decided to dedicate her life to this campaign, which was to keep the faith, essentially. And so this woman Moira basically just did this whole thing, and so it was recognized. Eventually, became recognized. She continued to do this project until her death in 1944, and people know her over the world as the Poppy Lady, and that's where this this tradition comes from. And for her, this was, it wasn't sort of a, oh, support our troops. That's not what it was about. It was protest the carnage, and that's what we got. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's good.
But it's stopping and thinking about that, because a memorandum, but also a warning of, see how many poppies, I mean, this is a generation gone. It was just gone.
Right.
And that is not something that I feel like now we can even comprehend the extent to which that was affected everyone. And heeding those warnings, we're not always very good at it. So I love that you delved into both pieces, and I dropped both the poems in the chat so that you can.
Oh, great.
Because they're just so powerful, and they bring you into the space, into the time by reading them. And it's World War I is actually my husband's, one of his favorite subjects as well. And the leading from World War I into World War II, and causation, and I definitely learned more about world history from Steve, from my husband, than I ever did, ever. But it's just really, and he's actually the first person to ever ask me. I'm loving the comments. Kelly, I love your comment. He was the first person to ask me to make him a poppy, and so I knit him one out of this vibrant bowl that I had, and he wore it all around, and he talks about it in all different aspects of all, different facets of why people wear them, and then also the history, and really stopping and looking at that. Even just the small reminders of what has happened and how we can do things differently, I feel like are really important. I'm sorry, I'm babbling again.
No, you're doing great. So I'm gonna jump back to my slides, just because it's what I've got here. But if there's anything else, the next big thing that that kind of took over were, of course, our favorite, the pussy hats, which were not without their own difficulty. So there are some folks who feel like the pussy hats were exclusionary, because not everybody's pussy is pink. And not everybody has a pussy. And so, and the organizers who kind of started the pussy hat movement have gone back and said, well, pink because of feminism. And, so these things are never easy. It's not always as clear cut as we just did a thing to protest. But
I guess I wonder if it ever is that clear cut.
Yeah, I don't think it is. It's easy looking back and saying this was a thing that moved history forward in a way.
And it all goes back to that drops of water turn the wheel, because it's individuals that create a protest or a resistance or an awakening. It's not, you don't have this mob mentality of there's this collective of people that we pick up and here's your protest. Right. It really is the individual people that build that. And there's not going to be just a couple of stories or a couple of points of view when you're talking about that crafticism, that's going to be a deeply, deeply individual experience. And that could be that someone's awakening and wonderful experience of protesting something and wearing a pink pussy hat can inadvertently injure another person who identifies as a woman and yet does not have these designated parts. I say designated with large quotes.
Sure.
That say, this is who you get to be. And so there's this there's not even a balancing act that you can do with when you're talking about such a big movement. There's
Right.
not one easy answer, and there's not one easy way of doing things. I mean, I won't say easy, one way, because it's never easy.
Right.
There's no easy when it comes to trying to build an equitable society.
Well,
and
and it's, go
sorry.
ahead, Cal.
Yes.
No, go ahead.
I think that's really true. I also think that every act of protest kind of has a moment, and it's never clear cut. And sometimes that moment comes full circle. And we talk about Gandhi, and we talk about nonviolence, and then but he's also in some respects quite a problematic figure.
Yeah.
And that bears acknowledging. Can I jump in with a historical thing real quick, Beck?
Sure. Go.
I want to talk about, as we're talking, hang on, I had pussy hats up too, because I was going to talk about that. I wanted to talk about, as we're talking about sort of a moment of a thing and how craftivism sort of changes based on that moment. And Mom's here, so she can kind of help me out with this. But I wanted to talk about the history of kente cloth,
Yes.
specifically in Ghana, because it's very interesting how the production of kente cloth and its history there has kind of changed over time, and what it's meant in and around politics. And like I said, Mom can kind of help me out. But of course, Ghana had been under colonial influence for a while. Sort of everybody had been through there. And when Kwame Nkrumah came to power and was trying to essentially gain a national identity for Ghana and gain its independence, one of the things that he did was he destooled all the tribal leaders who had tremendous political power in Ghana. And essentially his goal was to sort of equalize the playing field, and by doing that, taking away sort of all of this traditional tribal power that everyone had. And so these identifications of region, of area, of kente cloth, depending on where you come from, the patterns change, the colors change. It's very personal to regions. It's very personal to tribes. And then as religion factors into it, is also personal to religion. And he eliminated all of that, and it went away. And you can say, well, wait a minute, Nkrumah took away tribal identity from Ghana, but in order to unite Ghana, that is what he felt needed to happen. And in fact, it did help. But over time, it has come back in Ghanaian parliament, and it has become a new symbol of power. And there's an interesting thing about kente cloth now in Ghana, because kente cloth has been commercialized and co-opted, many people feel, by commerce, by capitalism. It is a lot of Ghanaians, especially in terms of in politics, who are using it and wearing it in politics, feel very strongly about using specifically handcraft, the originating kente cloths from regions, made by people from those regions in traditional ways. And remembering that Ghana is made up of hundreds of tribes, and the differentiation of these cloths is really important to those tribes, and it gets homogenized when it's repackaged and sold. And that's part of why what Pelosi did, although well-intentioned, was problematic, right? And that a lot of the women in particular are very particular about only wearing handcraft kente from their local regions by their local folks with their local symbols on it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another interesting thing that's happened, which is that some Ghanaian women who are sort of in contact with women of African descent in the West have recognized that kente also needs to be So it's just, there's sort of one evolution, right? So we see in like in the era of Nkrumah and Ghanaian independence politically, and sort of moving away from tribalism, now coming back towards it and reclaiming it in parliament, in spaces where these identities are now being re-recognized as part of the power of Ghanaian, not only national, but tribal identity. But then looking at African-American women who are of Ghanaian heritage and are of tribal heritage, reclaiming their tribal symbols, we look at the accessibility of crafts and say, like, these women here in the States don't have access to these very special, expensive, highly crafted kente. They are using the mass-produced kente, and some Ghanaian women are saying, hold on, right? Let's not fail to extend tribal recognition to those women who are in the United States who have been so far removed, again, through slavery, through colonialism, through acts of violence. They're handing back kente and saying, like, no, let's reconsider our idea that only handcraft expensive kente is the way to go, because that lets out these women who don't have access to anything else. And I think that whole sort of timeline, start to finish, is fascinating, in that the relevance all the way through, and talking about kente and its power to Ghanaians, both in Ghana historically now, and then also here in the US, is pretty interesting. So yeah, that was basically it.
That's very cool. We had a question in the chat, going back really quickly. Kat, do you want to? So Sandra asked if doesn't the pussy in Pussy Hat refer to what our former president had said about women? Kat?
Now I'm going to go from my point of view there, because that's all I can do. But I feel like yes and no. I feel like it was a catalyst moment of the what I observed in the folks that I had been in contact with during that the early on Pussy Hat Project movement, was seeing this restrained rage kind of being cut loose in those very blatant, derogatory, disgusting statements being made at the time by our former president, and people going, and what? But so much more than that, some people that I had seen take a very passive backseat to a lot of protests or speaking up, suddenly were putting themselves in the forefront. Now, like you said, this entire movement has it's not like it's over. It has had its troublesome parts, and again, it's such an individual thing. But I really feel like that was something that almost was like the snapping of a tether of a rage that had been not considered appropriate or allowed in some spaces. It was either you're, a crazy lady because you're mad, or you're, you don't have a say here because XYZ. And so that pushing down and that gaslighting for our entire history of anyone who can dominate over anyone else, and not necessarily by anyway, I'm going on a tangent.
No,
like
well, and yeah,
snapping of a tether in a lot of ways. That's how I felt about it, and a very tangible thing to say, you know what, screw you.
Well, but it is. I mean, I think it's a direct reaction to gynophobia. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a lot of what the Pussy Hat Project says, that it was both a reaction to the use of the word,
Yep.
but also, and that may be why the name, but that the idea was to show a sea, and the idea came from a hat in pink first. And so it was a way to show a sea of women, of femininity, of
a physical manifestation of ourselves,
right.
and renouncing that.
I'll show you, pussy. I mean,
Yeah.
but
right? Exactly.
like, yeah, you want to,
Or the pussy grabs back and the different parts and pieces of that. And
Yeah.
because that word is so stigmatized that it's,
Right.
oh, you just, it could also
Yeah,
be.
there was a lot of pearl clutching about the Access Hollywood tapes when that came out, about just the fact that that was the word that was used. It was not about the word, but it was the vulgarity of it, right?
The perceived
And it was more
used
about the vulgarity of it
than the act, than the
than about the assault of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and it's interesting too. I was at the barber, and my the hairstylist said that she didn't approve of the pussy hat. She said it's just so disgusting. Like, why would people just wear a a, a body part like that out in public? And I was like, it's not an actual pussy though. You know, that's not a. It's actually cat ears, right? And she really convinced that the hats were actually somehow supposed to represent vulva, and it was like, that's not how that works.
Do you know what your vulva looks like?
Let me show you my phone, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. And you know what I'm saying? Like, you know.
I actually encountered a friend of mine who was absolutely appalled that her mother decided to go and participate and make a pussy hat. She's like, do you realize, Mom, that you're putting a vagina on your head? She's like, no, honey. No, honey. But it was so interesting but it also sparked those conversations.
Right.
The conversations that are so considered taboo, again, the big quotes, with words that are considered crass or unsavory, with parts that get socially acceptable terms for parts of our bodies that some people consider unsavory. And it's like, really?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
yes, slogans and symbols. Oh, I'm loving all of the chat comments. This is so great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're good. I was just gonna say the last thing that I had was just the number of patterns and projects that have come out in the last few years, and not just around politics, although also around politics, but and a lot of it driven, again, I was saying that so much of this is that mom group, but there's also a lot of it in the younger community, that craftivism has actually been kind of adopted by this younger generation. I said my daughter would never need to do crafts to speak her mind, but she certainly does. Like, she's an artist, and a lot of her art is very political.
Well, she made a whole bunch of patches. She went through a patch making.
Oh yeah.
And one of the patches, I'll never forget. One of the patches was a painting of a glass with pink water in it, or pink liquid in it, and it said drinking the feminist juice, and then she had a all cops are bad, an ACAB patch, that these were highly political patches. So yeah.
What some people will consider, thoughtful or inflammatory statements, depending on where.
We've gone over, and we gotta wrap.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will say one funny thing that my daughter said to me about the word pussy is that she was reading an older book, and someone was referring to someone else in as an affectionate term as a pussy, meaning a kitty cat. And she's like, Mom, I wish that word hadn't, how did she put it? Something along the lines of hadn't taken on a negative connotation is really what she was saying, because it's a cute word. And hearing her read this book and talk to me about that, it really just was gratifying to me to hear her stop and think about how words are used and changed and evolve over time in what they're used in context with. So anyway, there's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and we're actually okay.
Well, it looks like the 2 o'clock link is not working because we're.
Yeah, but that's for our 2 o'clock
This is
tomorrow.
that's a separate link. Our meet and greet is tomorrow on Sunday, not today on Saturday. And the link provided for this Zoom is different from the other Zooms that are happening as
So
part
if
of NETA
somebody
SPA,
wants,
because I provided this link to the spa people myself, and it is not off of
Yeah.
their account. This
so
is
if
off of my
they
account.
have
so.
something else going on, if people want to go off to that, we understand we're running over.
Yes.
But
our meet and greet is in
yes,
fact
our
tomorrow,
other
24
link.
hours from now.
Eastern time. I guess I'd be curious is if anybody has any particular questions or things they
Sandra had her hand up, actually.
say again.
Sandra had her hand up, actually.
Oh,
You can unmute yourself or type in chat, whichever you would prefer, Sandra.
Oh, no, I did not. I actually have to go. But thank you.
All right.
This was
That's
wonderful
okay.
discussion. I learned so much. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
really good. Another word with the connotation has changed over time, gay.
Oh yeah,
And all of the different layers of that piece there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good question.
I'm
Oh.
gonna, if it's okay with everyone, I'm gonna jump in with what I was talking about and share this slide.
Yeah.
So this young group that I only know about them because they approached me at a show, the last show I did before COVID, actually.
Oh, wow.
And it's called the Tempestry Project. They're amazing. What they are doing is having people knit or crochet, temperature quilts, only they're doing them with scarves. And they're doing historical temperatures versus today. And showing what the difference is so that people can actually see. And they're not just doing, because there's always the argument 1 year to 1 year isn't a scientific thing. So they're doing as many years as they can for a single location to show over time. And it's kind of amazing. Anywhere they can find the records of the temperature day to day, they're doing these things.
Talk about a tactile representation of
that. And they've got several installations that they've done. I didn't get a slide up of this, but I think there are 2 actual museums, children's museums, that are specifically Craftivist museums where kids come in. They do, is it Aztec or Incan? I can't remember now, but the knot tying that used to be done in Central American Native communities to as public records, they've discovered that some of them were like tax records and stuff, but they did these intricate knots that mean different things.
Had a good point. The Stitch in Time sound like another good project for the National Mall.
Yes.
Especially the more and more locations that they have, that'd be really just fascinating, I think. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're great. You're great. And like I said, I hesitate to say that it's taking off right now because I think that it's always been there. And that, like with so many things, with social media, with more, 24-hour news and stuff, it's just, we see more of it now.
There's more accessibility too.
Yeah.
And I definitely see a piece of the millennial generation specifically, where so many of us, I'm kind of at the early end of that, but I still fall under that. I'm like some donut generation or something. There's some weird term that's where I'm at. But one thing that I have seen is with groups such as the one at Stitch in Time is we've had hammered into our heads for years and years and years, go to college, go to college, go to college, you'll get a job. And along with that is some devaluing that has happened in the brain of these hands-on maker abilities. And then what I'm seeing more recently is people coming out and kind of almost like shaking that off and saying, no, but I can. And that tethering again of what you should, coulda, woulda into what you can create, and this piece of self-exploration and creativity that is both healing and moving forward in our younger,
Yeah.
our upcoming, I should say, generations. And there's some, I'm trying to think of the word that I'm looking for. We've taken off our rosy tinted glasses on a lot of the things that we thought we were going to be able to individually maybe accomplish, and kind of edge back towards the underpinnings of our history that we can affect our future. And I'm trying to find the right word for what I'm trying. It's gone, but really seeing that resurgence. I actually am seeing a resurgence, not just on social media, but in what my kids and I call the olden times, when we used to go to knit night. In the olden times, we were seeing more and more new knitters of a younger generation, and younger generations, plural. And I'm actually some parent-child duos coming in to learn new crafts together, where you have this parent that maybe thought that they never could do crafting or something like that, suddenly being like, oh, well, maybe I can, and then coming with their child and learning things. So,
Right.
oh yeah, Craftivism opportunities in fiber world. So, so yeah, that's just been a really interesting expansion of, making that I have seen, especially in folks that are younger, or and maybe feeling slightly like, the gold road isn't quite so golden, so they kind of dig deep
Yep.
into themselves, and that's a way to really dig into yourself and really kind of create. So anyway, yes, connecting the current generations is exactly right. One thing that I personally had was I was home educated all the way through. There are pros and cons to that. I have siblings, and we spent a lot of time together. What that also did is it meant that my peers were not necessarily my peers, if that makes sense. I spent a lot of time in intergenerational situations where, as a young child or as a young adult, it was conversations not just between other young adults or children, it was conversations between entire groups of generations about all different kinds of things. And I'm seeing that more and more in the mainstream of things not having to be generational, where they are connecting, and it's less of the S and them again, and the how did you put it earlier, Kel? The calling in rather than the calling out. So it's a really healing thing. I think that, we end up with both pieces of that in different places, but it's just a really cool evolution that is happening.
Yeah, I agree. So the last thing I have, hang on, sorry, I can't see around what I'm doing here. Oh dear. There we go. One more. That's it. Too many things on my computer. All right. So where I was going with that is, in addition to the showing off the Tempestry project, because I just think they're cool, was talking about how many patterns there are out there now. And you can find them just looking up keywords, even just Craftivism. There's a ton, and they come from both sides. You can find stuff for supporting things that aren't necessarily what I might support. But if other people, there's room for all voices. Yeah, and it's just
distinction, because there's more than both sides, because there's, again, those facets of interlocking bits and pieces that where it's not cut and dried. Again,
there's, in fact, I'm going to bring this up. I wasn't sure I was going to share another slide, but I'm going to bring this one up just because this first pattern is called Protest is Patriotic, and it really could go to anyone who just, anyone who believes that making your voice heard is part of being a patriot. And I thought that was pretty cool, actually.
Really neat.
if you read about her, she definitely means it to reclaim the icons of patriotism, of the flag and things that seem to be meant for, or not meant for, seem to have been co-opted to a certain meaning. And so this was her way of saying that no, the left is also patriotic. But it's interesting that it really could go either way. This is, of course, the dissent collar as a cowl, which is awesome. There's several wonderful patterns. There's 2 cowls out there. There's a lovely sweater that is personally on my wish list to, if I ever get time to knit again. There's a great, I didn't get a picture of it up here, but there's a great armband. I'm making air quotes for those who can't see me. There's a great armband that's meant to be put around trees. So it's both yarn bombing, which I didn't get a chance to talk about as much. It is yarn bombing.
Discussion on it. So.
Yeah, but it's a Black Lives Matter black armband. And I just thought it was such a clever idea for anywhere that there are protests happening. Also, I know I didn't talk about it, but I know I can throw up whatever the, if you're interested in any of those patterns, I have all the names of the folks who've done them or who've designed them.
I'm going to call out the one that I threw.
Oh, yeah, please. I didn't get
the cloche that came up there, the suffragette cloche, the little purple, white, and yellow hat that was one of those patterns was the anniversary of the ratification of the women's right to vote was the 100-year when that came out in December. And so Jeannie Long of Kokoro Patterns put that together, and it's a felted hat. So you knit it up and then you felt it. It's actually knit from the crown down.
Oh,
but she really went, yeah, it's really cool. And then it's got a little tip up, but it's really meant to have the purple and the yellow and the white. And so those colors were very specific to the movement. And she really wanted to do something that was a commemorative of that 100 years. And she really touched on, yes, that was the ratification, but it wasn't for all women.
Right.
But it was the beginning of the ball rolling. So still calling that out while having that discussion at the same time. So it was really interesting. And she happens to be a lawyer by day and a pattern writer by night. So it's always interesting to have those conversations with her. So
does she wear a mask?
Does she wear a mask?
For secret identity.
No. She's not on Facebook.
I gotta say that RBG sweater is amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Jessica just posted an RBG sweater in the chat.
There are a couple of them. One that has the poofy sleeves.
Yeah.
They're fun. I do like being able to see like the patriotism is, or no, sorry, what was it? Protesting is patriotic.
Patriotic, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really clear statement and a really neat one, just because of the going back to the beginning of our official national history and the different pieces of protests that led to the Revolutionary War and all the different pieces. So I find it all fascinating. I find it all both fascinating and sometimes disturbing. So it's that combination of being elated by the information that you can dig up, but then also realizing the human cost of so many of these things in our lives and in our history. So I think
and I didn't get there are a couple of great yarn bombing pieces that were actual protest. A lot of yarn bombing is one of those things that comes up around the idea of craftivism, but most yarn bombing isn't
most of it's
protest.
It's just guerrilla art, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Which hasn't. I mean, some people say it's 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 about making people smile. It's about changing the
Or here in
the
Traverse City, we had permission from the Downtown Association and did some things. There was a kraken in a tree, a purple kraken in a tree outside of one of the restaurants for a couple of years.
wow,
And the lady who made it would take it down for the winter and then put it back out in the warmer seasons.
nice.
We also had some Mario Brothers inspired art on a drinking fountain. So it was just, there were some really fun, creative ways that people had gone out and done this, but
Yeah,
they had done it in such a way that it was an installation rather than a guerrilla art
right.
installation. So it's
Right.
just, there's so many interesting pieces there.
Yeah.
And you really, with yarn bombing, I mean, it can be, I know people who have yarn bobbed parts of their cars or friends' cars or as jokes. So it really runs the gamut of what it is used and how it's done.
Yeah.
What's for words.
So the last thing, I'm going to throw one last slide up there because I talked about it earlier. There is a new special up on
I heard
BBC
about this.
that is on Craftivism, and it talks about a lot of things we talked about here, but also some other stuff, and it's clever and fun and interesting, and it's kind of just nice to see ourselves out there in the media, right? It's fun to see the thing that we love being talked about. I grabbed this from the BBC site, but I will warn you that it's actually not able to be watched in the US from their website.
Oh,
There are some other places you can watch it. And I'm not going to say where or how because I'm not entirely sure that it has been released in the US yet. And so it may not be
Okay.
entirely okay.
that's one of those keep your eyes open kind of things.
Yeah. But, it's there and that's the name of it. And if you want to go find it, go for it.
A piece that we didn't get a chance to really touch on, but I would actually encourage folks to look into is craftivism as accessibility to materials and
Yes.
and thinking about, or even just reading about how there's sometimes some elitism in crafting of using the right tools or the wrong tools or the right materials or the wrong materials. And sometimes the cost associated with that is it's cost exclusive to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So being
Well,
aware.
and there's, I didn't want to get into too much of this because it's not quite on topic, but
Okay,
there's no. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying this is why it wasn't in my slides. But there's a lot of that classism of knitting versus crochet, and that knitting was something that crochet was something that has been used more throughout history as because it was to make household items. It was for useful goods, whereas knitting really had its resurgence in the 60s, 50s, 60s Vogue magazine kind of era where it became more elite and more of a specialty item and more of an art thing and more of, that sort of thing. And around that time is where we got it solidified in culture somehow that people of color crochet and white ladies knit. And that is very much kind of embedded in that belief that one is more everyday and one is more special. So, and that's something that it's important to know, I guess, and fight against, in ourselves and in culture. That the number of my POC friends who have said they've been told that they aren't knitters when they are, it is kind of astounding.
I will definitely say that I am multi-craftual,
Yes.
unabashedly. And I used to joke that the only thing that I don't do is macrame, and that has since gone by the wayside. Now I have done some, so gone back to it. I used to when I was younger, but I do think that just it's a good thing to kind of almost meditate on, is that accessibility piece, and assigning levels of elitism to crafts.
Yeah.
And that it happens, and being aware of it just being aware of it can help you stop and step back and say, oh, I've had that thought.
Right.
And realize that is a thing. So I guess that's kind of why I wanted to really just call that out. So I think that we're almost half an hour over at this point.
Yes, we are. We could go on, but I think it is time.
Thank you, Kel. The info, which I think that Jessica said that she was going to put that information in the YouTube video notes, so that you could access all of these links on all of the information that we've talked about and conversed.
Yes, they will be in the description of the YouTube video, and I will share as soon as I get the video up. I will share it with the Google group for NETA SPA, so everyone will
Great.
have a link.
Thank you guys so much.
And thank you so much for inviting me to join you, Becca.
Oh yeah, no, so happy.
It was a joy. So.